And that's another of his most famous poems. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So you see again how he depends on simple words and simple images. You can see that red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater so easily. And it's an image that'll stay with you. Once you've read this poem once, I don't think you ever forget it, whatever age you are when you first encounter it. And that to me is the magic of William Carlos Williams. It says, on his prescription pad, he scribbled a few lines whenever and wherever he could. In those precious times, the rhythm of the river he had rested beside as a child seemed to guide him. Like the water that sometimes ran slow, smooth, and steady, and other times came rushing in a hurried flood, Willie's lines flowed across the page. After his long doctor's day, Willie climbed to the attic where he kept a lamp and a desk filled with letters from his artist friends and notes he had made about things he had heard, seen, or done. And as the rest of Rutherford put out its lights, Willie took out his pen and his notes. He sat down and he looked at his words. And there's the plum poem again. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. I have heard people question, how can that be a poem? It's a note. And my answer to that is, first of all, that it engages the senses. It makes you nearly taste the plums and feel the coldness of them and the juice dribbling down your chin, doesn't it? So it gives you that sensory experience, which poetry is supposed to do. As well as that, as I said before, it gives you this wonderful domestic image of this very busy doctor coming in late at night, sort of tiptoeing around his dark kitchen. So it shares with you both a sensory experience and an emotional experience, and I think that makes it a poem, and a really wonderful poem as well. I've just a couple more things to say about Williams. That's the end of the book. I wanted to read just a couple of lines from an introduction that he wrote himself to a book of his poems in 1944. William Carlos Williams said, "To make two bold statements. There is nothing sentimental about a machine, and a poem is a small or large machine made of words." Let me say that again. A poem is a small or large machine made out of words. When I say there's nothing sentimental about a poem, I mean that there can be no part, as in any other machine, that is redundant. Prose may carry a load of ill-defined matter like a ship, but poetry is the machine which drives it, pruned to a perfect economy. As in all machines, its movement is intrinsic, undulant, a physical more than a literary character. In a poem, this movement is distinguished in each case by the character of the speech from which it arises. Therefore, each speech having its own character, the poetry it engenders will be peculiar to that speech, also in its own intrinsic form. The effect is beauty. So there's two really important ideas there. The poem as a machine, which can only have working parts. It can't have extraneous parts, because then it won't work. And also, the poetry has to be written in the language of the poet, not in some vaulted language that they've gotten out of books, but in the language that they speak in every day and that they hear in every day, and that's what makes the poetry beautiful. And he was one of the first to say such a thing, and that's why he's so important to me. Can we have the next slide? This is the painting by his college friend, Charles Demuth. The poor man, I really ought to find out how to say that properly. And the poem that goes with it, again, is the great figure. Among the rain and lights, I saw the figure 5 in gold on a red fire truck, moving tense, unheeded, to gong, clang, siren howls, and wheels rumbling through the dark city. So again, he's giving you a real sensory feeling of being on a street corner in the evening and seeing this fire truck flash past you. I'll wrap up by just reading a few more of his poems. They tend to be very short as well, so they're a lovely thing for a reader to present. And I want to first read one of his oldest poems, because as it said in the book, he started out writing poetry that imitated the poetry he had learned in school. And it took time, as it does take time, to discover his own voice and his own way of writing poetry. So this is one of his older efforts. And it's called Homage. And it says, Elvira, by love's grace, there goeth before you a clear radiance, which maketh all vain souls candles when noon is. The loud clangor of pretenders melteth before you like the rolls of carts passing, but you come silently, and homage is given. Now the little bypath which leadeth to love is again joyful with its many, and the great highway from love is without passers. So it's a lovely poem, but again, you've got melteth, goeth, maketh, not everyday language at all. Now compare that to this poem, which is just called Poem. I can find it. Yeah. This is one of my favorites, and it's just called Poem. As the cat climbed over the top of the jam closet, first the right forefoot, carefully, then the hind stepped down into the pit of the empty flower pot. See the difference? It's a big difference. You get such a sense of the movement of that cat. This is called In the Sconset Bus, describing a woman that he saw on a bus. Upon the fallen cheek, a gauzy down, and on the nape, indecently, a mat of yellow hair stuck with celluloid pins, not quite matching it. That's 2 shades darker at the roots. Hanging from the ears, the hooks, piercing the flesh, gold and semi-precious stones, and in her lap the dog, Youth, resting his head on the ample shoulder, his bright mouth agape, pants restlessly backward. This is another one that I particularly like, and it's called Young Woman at a Window. She sits with tears on her cheek on her hand, the child in her lap, his nose pressed to the glass. And finally, back to the plums. He obviously liked plums a lot. To a poor old woman. Munching a plum on the street, a paper bag of them in her hand. They taste good to her. They taste good to her. They taste good to her. You can see it by the way she gives herself to the one half sucked out in her hand, comforted, a solace of ripe plums seeming to fill the air. They taste good to her. Thanks very much.